Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on another Sunday. We have a lot of crazy things to talk about today. I'm just going to start with, here's where you can go for the soundtrack today. For those of you who are new, we use headphones, so have some handy for a soundtrack that we listen to at the end, where we link everybody's brainwaves together with brain entrainment and synchronicity of the hemispheres. We're attempting to create a global mind link of quite a number of people. At this point, there's about 50,000 people following this on Facebook and YouTube. Also, you can find me on Instagram. Just look for @Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. And that's basically how you get me on Facebook, Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, and that's how you find me doing a search on YouTube. This is where you can go to ask a question or make a comment on anything that we cover here. scientificsounds.com/ask-a-question. And here is where you can go to my YouTube channel to see all the broadcasts that I've done up to this point, which is, I think this is number 95 or something like that. I've been doing this for almost 2 years. It's a lot of information, but each one of these broadcasts builds on information that was discussed in previous broadcasts. So the ultimate way of fleshing out anything I talk about is to go back and watch the entire series, which would take a while, but there's a lot of information there, and we explore all kinds of different ideas about the nature of reality as we currently understand it in quantum physics. And the more that we get into the discoveries in quantum physics about the nature of reality in the core of the quantum field, the more we realize that we're talking about ancient texts from India and China, the Upanishads and the Mahāprabha and the Vedas and the Sutras of Patanjali and the I Ching, pretty much have already talked about for 4,000 to 5,000 years, the concepts that we're just now, quote, discovering in quantum physics. And as we'll see, most of the Nobel Prize-winning quantum physicists in the world who have developed or discovered these theories in the quantum field have been students of the ancient texts, something that you wouldn't expect. But yep, every single one of them have delved into the past to see what is being said about the nature of reality in the Vedas and the Upanishads and the I Ching. It's like pretty amazing stuff. But one of the things that we're attempting to do here is a grand esoteric scientific experiment. According to the quantum field, when you break the component parts of what appears to be this reality into smaller and smaller parts to see what everything is made of, as we've discussed many times before, where, my body is made of cells, those are made of chemical compounds, those are made of atoms, and atoms are made of component parts, protons, electrons, and neutrons. And as we proceed with bigger and bigger atom smashers to smash these little tiny parts open to see what they're made of, protons and neutrons and electrons are smashed and create quarks and charms and hadrons and leptons, and keep breaking them open until finally at the core of everything there's nothing there except energy in a state of resonance, forming what's called standing waves. And standing waves are a repetitive oscillation that looks like it's solid because it's moving so fast and your eye can't tell. So it looks like patterns are forming in the quantum field. The resonance is forming patterns. Anyway, by collecting our minds together in a certain altered state with the use of headphones and a certain soundtrack and binaural beats to entrain your brainwaves, we can entrain everybody's brainwaves to exactly and precisely the same state of consciousness with a precision that's never been possible before in the history of humanity. And if we start to manage what thought we're holding about what the picture of reality is, there's power in numbers, and we can shift the quantum field. That's the experiment. From a standpoint of physics, of quantum physics, it's a no-brainer. This is how reality works. The scientific community agrees with the Vedas that reality as we know it is a projection of consciousness. Consciousness is primary. And the fluctuations and the resonance fields that we see at the core of the quantum field is consciousness itself, which makes up, most of reality that we see, the space between things. And things have been changing. Reality in the world is responding, as far as I can see, to what we've been doing for the last 2 years. More and more and more. Here's just a sampling of the last cycle of some of the magazines in my newsfeed. New Scientist, a new dawn for physics, the Large Hadron Collider finds strongest hints yet of a game-changing new particle. Every single article is about the nature of reality, every single one. Dawn of the new physics. What they're talking about is when they smash these atomic particles open and they're looking at the spin patterns where things spin out, they're seeing weird fluctuations that shouldn't be there. And the only reason there could be a fluctuation is because there's another particle creating its own resonance that's affecting the resonance that you see. Let's see. The anomalies that are being seen. Right here, it's like, let me get that. Where is it? There. These anomalies could be the real deal, which means if it's true, there's new particles that nobody's discovered before, a deeper layer of reality that could change physics as we know it. The key point here is, from the standpoint of the Vedas, the Sutras of Patanjali, 4,000-year-old text in Sanskrit, this is deeply discussed, that if we believe that reality is made of ever smaller parts, and we start to smash things apart to see what those parts are, and then we break those parts open and look to see if they're smaller parts. If we believe in our worldview and the collective unconscious mind that the world is made of parts, then the universe will dish up as many parts as we need to find. The universe has an infinite storehouse of ever smaller and smaller and smaller particles. And so the deeper you will go down that rabbit hole, the more reality will create whatever you're expecting to see. Which brings to mind, in the distant ancestral past, when we didn't have mathematics and astronomy and all that kind of stuff to understand what is going on when you look up at the sky at night and you see stars and you see a sun, you see moons, you have no conception of what those are. It's magical. The sun comes up in the morning, you feel the heat on your skin. Everything obviously depends on it, including you. It's so bright you can't look at it, but you can feel the heat. You don't know what that thing is. It comes up every day. No wonder the Egyptians were worshiping Ra as a god of some kind. And when it goes down at night, the stars all pop out. You don't know what those are either. What are stars? I mean, and they seem to be forming patterns. And the more you lay on your back at night and you study these patterns, you start to see what you normally see on a summer's day when you're laying on your back looking at the clouds. You see castles in clouds. Your subconscious mind begins to find recognizable patterns. You see dogs and you see birds and that aren't really there. It's a projection of your consciousness is jumping to conclusions and seeing things, just as consciousness is jumping to a conclusion that this is what reality looks like. And as long as I believe that, this is what I get. The universe is looking for a path of least resistance to create whatever it is that you want. So unconsciously, you're expecting it to be this way. That's the path of least resistance you just supplied to the universe, and it falls down that rabbit hole and pops this up for you. Here's another one, Scientific American. Origins of space and time. Does space-time emerge from a more fundamental reality? You bet it does. The more fundamental reality is consciousness itself. But here, space-time may emerge from a more fundamental reality. Figuring out how could unlock the most urgent goal in physics, a quantum theory of gravity. Now, we discussed gravity before, a couple of live streams ago, where what we normally see in physics is the four great forces right now is what's recognized. Electromagnetism, like we were in high school, the total electromagnetic spectrum, everything is made of electromagnetism and photons. But what they didn't teach us is that sound waves are not on the electromagnetic spectrum. That it's the big yin-yang of science, right? The big yin-yang of science is electromagnetism on this side and sound frequencies on this side. Sound is not electromagnetic. It's pure energy moving through a medium. Air molecules with my voice right now. Sound travels through water 5 times better than air and travels through a solid 5 times better than water. This is 70% water, perfect medium for transmitting sound. And my bone skeletal structure is the solid, so it travels through that even better. But when you're outside of the realm of sound at 20 to 20,000 hertz, that fundamental force is still there, going ever lower frequencies and ever higher frequencies. Higher than 20,000 hertz is not sound, but it's still there. Lower than 20 hertz is still there, but it's not called sound. We actually have a mechanism for processing below 20 hertz. That's vibration sense, separate from hearing. And that sense is 0.3 to 500 hertz. So below 0.3 hertz, those vibrations still get slower and slower and slower. They don't have a name for it. It's not sound, it's not vibration anymore. It's something else. It's a force of the universe. And as those frequencies get, lower and larger amplitudes of the wave, eventually it's my feeling that this is what we call gravity waves. Gravity waves are pure energy moving through the medium of dark matter, which is consciousness itself, according to the Vedas. So these massive ripples flowing through the universe, ripples in space-time, have a crest-to-crest wave that in some cases are hundreds of millions of light years from crest to crest. And the speed of that sound wave is hundreds of millions of years. So it's imperceptible to us. It looks like it's frozen and not moving. But once again, it's relativity. It's, in this case, relativity of size and time. If my lifespan is, 85 years, and ripple to ripple in space-time is 100 million years, it looks frozen to me like it's not moving. But that's just my perception, my relativity in time and space. Everything is kind of like that way. Things are moving, things are vibrating. Everything is in a state of resonance, from the smallest of the possible small to the largest and slowest of the possible large and slow. I'm someplace stuck in the middle of all that, and my perceptions related to my lifespan can only perceive frequencies resonating within a certain range of time and space. outside of those ranges, from my perspective, they seem to be frozen and not moving, but that's not true. It's all a perspective issue. I sort of like this picture here. It's essentially what we're trying to do is like lift space-time and lift reality and look at what's underneath, what makes it all tick, what's the real nature of things. And we're talking about space-time here in this same article, Origins of Space-Time. Here we're talking about how space-time emerges and different types of theories. One of them is the emergent space-time according to string theory. Another one is quantum loop theory, and I'm not going to get into that now. But what I'm getting at here is the fact that a larger and larger and larger percent of articles in my news feeds over the past year have been increasingly filled with the question of what is reality. Here's the latest science news, quantum reality, how revolution in physics shook the foundations of human experience. Global consciousness in the scientific community is spending more and more and more of its time contemplating what is the nature of reality. And the conclusions that are coming up are completely and totally aligned with what's been said in the most ancient texts on the planet, the Vedas and the Upanishads and the I Ching, and the ancients had the answers to these things already by only consulting the deep inside of themselves, where all the answers truly are. When we stopped perfecting the machinery inside of our own consciousness through advanced techniques of meditation and developing this machinery, when we stopped that, we externalized everything. Instead of developing this machine, we developed external machines made of silicone and computers and internets and all the rest, and scientific equipment and larger atom smashers. So all of our attention went outside of ourselves to find the secrets of the universe, when in reality, our ancients found those same exact secrets by going inside and developing this machine. So part of our task here is to go back and develop this machine and find out and be able to trust the truth that you find there, because we've been sort of hoodwinked and hypnotized into believing that it can't be believed unless we use this, quote, scientific method, which means double-blind studies. And unfortunately, the quantum field, from the most famous Nobel Prize-winning physicists on the planet, have shown repeatedly that the act of observing changes the observed. So there goes double-blind studies right out the window, because the act of setting up an experiment changes what the experiment is going to show. And me observing the experiment happening is changing it as well. It's sort of a cosmic biofeedback. I change what I look at by how it affects me. But here we go, here with the quantum reality article here. Here's that article on the inside where we see uncertainty reigns, and down in small print, quantum mechanics says that whether an electron behaves as particle or a wave depends on how it is observed. So my observation changes things in the quantum field of reality. We're here. This one, I don't think you can see it. It's washing out, saying quantum theory is of fundamental significance in connection with almost all processes that we know. In the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, all possible realities exist, but humans perceive just one. It's the concept I've talked about before in the last few episodes about the fact that the next moment for now is a doorway that opens into an infinite number of corridors of every possible outcome of what the next moment could possibly be in the mind of the Godhood. Anything is possible. And there's an infinite number of renditions of me in this room with you in this particular world that we all agree is what the world is. There's an infinite number of corridors of every possibility of where this next moment could be in my conversation with you. And what that's saying is that we step down the same corridor over and over and over again to flesh this one out. And let's say that I get a cancer death sentence and I've got 6 months to live, and I go deep enough inside myself where I can bypass my thinking mind and the part of me and my personality that exists in time and space and arrive at the present moment, which is before all of that, and align with my deepest big mind and step into a parallel corridor instead of this one. And that corridor has no cancer. So all of a sudden we have what's in this corridor is called a spontaneous remission. The cancer just disappeared because I stepped into a different corridor reality where there was no cancer for me. What I'm attempting to do here as an experiment with the headphones, with these broadcasts, and a mind link with brain entrainment, is to have the power of numbers of people aligned together to shift into another corridor where the world is not going off the cliff, where climate change is acknowledged and people are scrambling to do something about it instead of denial. Bigger than that, a spontaneous remission of the basic tenet of what we think reality needs to be. There's no reason why reality even has to be based on money. How about that for a reality? The Star Trek universe was that way. Money was not a thing anymore. It had been abandoned. Anyway, I mean, the most basic things that you take for granted that, well, we have to put up with that. We don't have to put up with anything. We can change this to be anything we want. And what I'm saying is that as we watch the success of this experiment, we should see an increasing rise in the world of more and more attention to what is reality itself. Because where all of this goes, in every single one of these magazines and all of the news feeds that I've got, every one of them is talking about what is reality. What's reality in the quantum field? What's the origin of time and space? Do we create space-time? A new way to think about the fabric of reality. New dawn for physics. All of this is a centering of global consciousness on the question of what is reality itself, because at the core of that is what I'm talking about here. At the core of reality is all of us linked together in big mind in a collective unconscious way, and by consensus vote we're all agreeing that this is what reality looks like. We shift that idea at a quantum field by aligning ourselves together, then reality itself shifts along with that. Because ultimately, at the core of the quantum field, this is nothing more than an idea that's being expressed in the mind of God, or Atman, or Brahma, or whatever word you want to put on the grand self-organizing principle of life in the universe. But look at this one here. It's like, do we create space-time? And that article on the inside is really something, which we will talk about today. This, quantum perspective. Quantum perspective, it says, our efforts to see reality from multiple points of view at once are revealing the strange part we all play in creating it. Here it is, right here. Finally, the scientific community is expressing an idea that we've been talking about for 2 years, and linking our minds together in order to galvanize the global consciousness to begin considering how can we change this from the inside out instead of from the outside in, which would be political revolutions or revolutions in general, or legislation changes, which we know is just not going to happen. The world is solidly stolen by bad guys in the name of profit. But the concept that we create reality from an infinite number of standpoints of once that we're all collectively engaged in is the core tenet of what I see arising in the world now. In these kind of articles, article after article after article, things are changing. The global pandemic itself locked all of us away into our little homes, contemplating our navels, in a grand timeout for humanity, so that we could reconsider and see reality from a different perspective. And that certainly has taken place. We're not out of it yet. I mean, we're still in a global pandemic, but things are shifting. That pandemic will be over at some time. The variations that are happening in the original coronavirus, COVID-19, and its Delta variant and its Omicron variant, and there will be more and more variants because the cat is out of the bag now because it was mismanaged. The trend is you see that each variant is less lethal and more contagious. At some point, it'll be a very contagious sort of bad flu that will not kill you. Everybody will get it eventually. Nobody will die, and then it will be over. And we will come out the other end of that with a completely different perspective on our lives and our workplace, and what we should be paid for that. Like right now, it's already happening. It's like the businesses that are opening up again can't find anybody to hire. They had to fire all their workers and send them home, and they had to close down, and now they're opening back up, and the workers aren't coming back. And so they're saying, well, there's a shortage of workers. Excuse me? No, there's not a shortage of workers. People have awakened to the fact that you were paying them crapo wages with no benefits, and that doesn't work. You had to step out of that for a year and get a good sense of what you're worth. And when you come back into the workplace, you realize, I'm worth more than that. If you want to hire me, you got to pay me what I'm worth, right? And I'm not going to work for starvation wages anymore with no benefits. And if your business model depends on me working for slave labor wages, then you've got a bad business model, and your company deserves to go under because you were living under an illusion, a self-delusion that your profitability had as one of its requirements me to starve. And be willing to do that. Be willing to work for absolutely not enough money, so I have to have 2 or 3 jobs, so that you could be profitable on a business model where I have to starve. And then I'm locked away by the universe because of the coronavirus, and I have a good long look at myself, contemplating my navel alone in my house for a year. And I don't come out of that the same person I went into it. I'm different now. The workforce in general is different now. And all of a sudden these companies have to reinvent themselves. When we here's another one, how the physics of resonance shapes reality. The same phenomena by which an opera singer can shatter a wine glass also underlies the very existence of subatomic particles. Excuse me, but have we been talking about this particular aspect of reality for 2 years now? The fact that the core of the quantum field is nothing but energy pattern relationships and forming standing waves. It's resonance. The question here that they're not getting deep enough in this article is, what is resonating? and why? That's the ultimate question of reality. At the basis of all things in the quantum field is there's nothing there but something in a state of vibration forming standing waves. And from the ancient texts, it's consciousness itself generating an idea. And this is the idea. But these quantum resonance fields, where we have an infinite number of resonant frequencies all interacting together, forming these standing waves, and the mathematics of the relationship of those standing waves appear to make forms like quarks and charms and hadrons and leptons, but they're all amorphous, they're all illusions. They're not actually solid, they're just nested standing waves, and when you back up far enough where you can't see all the details because they're submicroscopic, you get what appears to be something that's solid. Sort of like the sand vibrating on the metal plate, the Chladni plate experiments done by Hans Jenny back in the 60s. Each one of these sand patterns is a highly precise mathematical pattern of the relationship of standing waves that form geometric patterns. And every different frequency has a different pattern that it shows. And these patterns are a property of what type of metal that the metal plate, what it's made of, its thickness, its resonant characteristics, and what you have on top. In this case, it's sand. It's going to form certain precise type of patterns with every different frequency. But if I change the sand and put talcum powder, it has different resonance characteristics, and it's going to form a different pattern even though the frequency hasn't changed. And whether I had sand forming one pattern or talcum powder forming another pattern, if I changed the metal plate to be a different material, a different thickness, or made it wood, then we'd have different types of patterns that show up. So from the standpoint of quantum field, we have an infinite number of vibrational frequencies, and we have an infinite number of substances it's resonating. So we have an infinity times infinity nested standing waves that are all mathematically related together. And the math is music theory. The relationship of these vibrational frequency patterns all interacting with each other, forming an infinite complexity of standing waves, is what reality is made of. You back up far enough from it, and it becomes quarks and charms and hadrons and leptons and protons, electrons and neutrons and atoms and compounds and people and everything you see in the reality that you're familiar with. These patterns are from cymatics experiments using water with different frequencies. And essentially, this is 70% of your body is water. So vibrational frequencies impacting your body is causing these kind of patterns in the water in your body. And they're energetic and they're mathematical. And they're designed to interact with the structure of the water in your cells and outside of your cells. Intracellular, extracellular fluid forms these patterns, and it energizes the system. It's sort of resonant vibrational food for your body. Every kind of frequency has its own kind of pattern. You start combining all these patterns together, and they form more complex patterns of standing waves. That appears to be, you and me. But underlying all of those patterns is mathematical relationships that's very precise and can be described in quantum physics. Here's another one. Can consciousness be explained by quantum physics? Well, duh, come on. Absolutely yes. That's what these Nobel Prize-winning physicists are actually discovering on a daily basis. And what I am seeing in all of these news feeds, every month getting more and more thick with what's the nature of reality. more and more thick from another realm of what is consciousness and what is consciousness itself. But we know that math is involved, that what appears to be one thing is actually resonant fields stacking together in a very precise mathematical way that fools us into thinking it's something. But underlying all of those relationships of all those overlapping patterns and vibration is a core of mathematics that are basically the same mathematics that we see in music therapy. Music theory that came from, partially from Pythagoras. Octaves and harmonics and overtones, the mathematics of that is what we see at the quantum field. These things form, atoms and chemical compounds and things. But underlying that, it's coming from a substrate in consciousness itself, represented as mathematical relationships of electromagnetic discharge in our own brains that bring together the math and what appears to be waves and particles all like aligned together and synchronized up in our consciousness, in our brain. We receive vibrational frequency relationships through our five senses. Our eyes are tuned to a very, very narrow spectrum of color frequencies, 400 to 750 nanometers. Anything outside of that range, we don't see it. We see a space around something, so something becomes apparent. An object becomes apparent because of the limitations of our eyesight. We can't see the space around it, so therefore we think there's an object emerging. But in reality, those vibrational frequencies are there. We just can't process it with this particular mechanism of the eyeball that we created, or hear, or think. Thinking, is only possible because of the limitation of thought itself. We can't conceive of infinity because we can't walk around it. We can't see it from all sides and define it. So it's through the limitation of seeing and the limitation of hearing and the limitation of touch. All of those are segmented into a narrow spectrum of vibrational frequencies that each of these senses is designed to interpret. And the interpretations of all of those senses together form a network experience of what we consider to be the real world. If we, and when we go down to this sort of next rabbit hole where everything is amorphous and nothing is actually real, where when we dig deeper and deeper into, down the rabbit hole, and we examine the true reality of, say, the Cheshire Cat, all we end up with is the cat's smile, right? It's got no reality at all. It's an illusion. It's a movie we're in. It's, is information the only thing that exists? And when we contemplate the core nature of reality, and we see that now also reflected in what's happening with, Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg has just renamed his whole company. Of course, Facebook was getting such a bad rep, and so many people were unhappy, and 30% have left Facebook. That's unimaginable numbers of people leaving. What does Zuckerberg do? He just changed the name of his company. That's his effort to make us happy. And so he's now calling it Meta, and his banking, tens of millions of dollars in a gamble that all of us are moving towards VR, a virtual reality experience with the big clunky goggles where everything is like in 3D. there was a version of that called Second Life at one point, a virtual reality experience where you make a body and an avatar body, and other people make avatar bodies, and then you all go into this three-dimensional virtual space, and you can see and talk to each other and buy and sell things. And it eventually died. It was pretty primitive looking on the inside, but his banking is with Meta. Is our experience won't be sitting here looking at a computer. Our experience will be with these goggles on, and we'll have an artificial body, and so will you, and so will everybody. And we'll be able to, fly down to the mall and walk around the mall and buy things, see things in virtual reality, and pick them up and look at them and buy it, and talk to you and talk to other people and go to concerts, and that's what he's banking on. As far as I can see, it ain't going to happen until the virtual reality goggles look like a pair of glasses like this, non-obtrusive. But that brings me to another point. I'm going to pop my master screen up here and show you the perfect example. This is Star Wars, the online game, and you can make your own avatar. So here's one that I've made. I've got a bunch, different avatars. These are bodies that you construct yourself, and you name them, and then you can go inside this body. Let it load here. And here we are. So here's this body, one that I created. I'm in a space station, and I can look around and I can see things up above me and around me. I can zoom in and out. You can see other people here, and these are actual real people just like me. This guy right here has created this body, and this person's created that body, and all these people are real people someplace in the world. You don't know who they are or where they are. This guy could be a 12-year-old girl in Germany, and this lady over here could be, some 50-year-old man in Iowa. You just don't know. But I'm here, and I can interact with this environment. I can look around and see things. I can pull out my lightsaber, and I can run around, and I can look at all this stuff that's moving. It all looks very real. Where this is going is the reality of this is stepping up every year to a point where eventually it will look so real that you won't be able to tell it's not real. But I can talk to people and interact with them. I can get on some kind of a, if I can drive around. I can go on sort of raids with other people and battle monsters together. Everybody is synced up together. All these are real people in a virtual reality experience. And this is an excellent sort of metaphor for reality in the quantum field as we are now experiencing it. And the latest information from the quantum field is that when I'm here looking at the things that I'm looking at, this computer program that's running right now, that's generating these images, is generating this image from thousands of standpoints of once. This person right here, who's some 12-year-old girl from Germany maybe, she's looking out of this guy's eyes the same way I am in this character. And the perspective is slightly different. So if we could see what she's seeing, and she was looking around, she would see the same reality but from over there instead of over here. And if I'm like running way over here, now our perspective is very different of what she's going to see and what I'm going to see. And how this computer program works is that when I look around here behind me and up above me, and I see all these different things, right? What I'm not looking at, what ends at the frame reference of this screen, all the stuff that's like behind me over here is not there anymore. As soon as I'm looking up here, the computer only spends computer time and processing power to process the frame that I'm looking at and all the animations that are in that frame. All the animations for all the frames around me that I'm not looking at, the computer is not wasting its valuable processing time to process those images. Those images are now in a twilight zone state. The math is there to describe them, but the image itself is not generated because that takes too much energy. Now, from the standpoint of the universe, all these things that are behind me that have now, as soon as I move away from them, have just now disappeared. They're not actually being generated. The math to describe them is there. They have a potential to be there, but they're not there until I turn around and I look. Now those images become generated, and the ones I were just looking at the ceiling are now gone. The math is there, but there's no reason for them to actually pop into existence until I need to look at them. My consciousness and where it's going is generating reality wherever I look in this computer program. But this is the perfect description of what Nobel Prize-winning physicists are telling us about the nature of reality itself, that reality itself is the same way. That here I'm looking at my computer screen and I'm talking to you, and you're looking at your computer screen and you're seeing me. You're not seeing behind your head the back of your room. So therefore, reality is not going to waste its valuable processing power, universal processing power, to generate reality behind me. Now, it has to, because I can see it in my computer screen. What I'm seeing on my screen is me and this. Therefore, reality has to generate this. But it's not generating what's over here. It's not generating what's over here that is outside of the screen and outside of my personal view. That has turned into Schrodinger's cat paradox, where it's neither a living or a dead cat. It's the potential to be, my room, but it doesn't have to be until I look, so it can flesh out my reality. The universe is an ecological place. It's not going to waste energy. Now, once we get a bunch of people together in the same room with a whole bunch of different standpoints, because people are standing at different angles, then the universe is going to have to use its max processing power to generate the entire three-dimensional reality, because somebody is there looking at different angles, and all of those have to appear. If there's any angles that are outside of everybody's collective view from different standpoints, those little angles, and wherever they are, aren't manifest. Reality is not there until you look. Pretty crazy, right? But the online gaming community is the perfect example of that. And the fact that consciousness is pushing forward with this guy, Mark Zuckerberg, who's banking on the fact that this is where we're all going to go, that the collective consciousness of the Western world will eventually all put on our, Oculus units and be involved in a collective unreal environment that is being generated by computers, is just the allegory that the universe is presenting to us as a metaphor for this reality itself. All of these things are developing out of this quantum field because it's an emergence of consciousness maturing in an emergency situation where consciousness must wake up and change reality, or the whole thing is going to go over the cliff. And that's what we're doing here. And when we see these changes emerging in the world, where more and more discussion is about the nature of reality and what is consciousness, and moving into a virtual reality metaphor for what this reality is. So it becomes more and more painfully obvious to the people in that reality that, wait a second, when I get out of my virtual, I take my Oculus off, and I look at this, I realize that this is actually kind of the same thing. It's like The Matrix, which is a movie that came out of that collective unconscious to clue us in and to help progress, our idea that virtual reality and real reality are metaphors of the same underlying reality that we're all experiencing, which is essentially an idea of what reality could be, interpreted through our 5 senses, or 6 senses, or 12 senses, or 21 senses, or however many you want to go. I had a whole live stream on that. 21 senses. All based on the mathematics that we see in music theory, exemplified in most ancient texts on the planet, like the I Ching, and 64 hexagrams of the I Ching are metaphors for the 64 codons in the DNA, and the DNA appears to be the same as the ancient texts and Vedas, where the central channel of the spinal cord is Shushumna, and the two intersecting serpents that come around, Ida and Pingala, represent the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. All of this aligns itself together as a metaphor mathematically of what we actually experience in real life. But here it is again, the math, the viewpoint, is expressed in the Vedas, the most ancient texts on earth. The same stuff that these quantum physicists are talking about has been talked about in these ancient texts. It's all sort of coming together at this point, just in time to align our consciousness deep within itself to explore the true meanings behind the math, the underlying principles that the math is an expression of in consciousness itself. Were the most ancient patterns of how the universe works, the yin-yang thing. The most ancient text on the planet is the I Ching, 5,000 years old. But the processes that are talked about in the I Ching that is 5,000 years old are at least 2 to 3 times older than that, before language and the written form was invented. These were passed as oral traditions before we could write things down, before we invented that mechanism. So the fact that the I Ching is 5,000 years old, begs the question that how long was it passed in oral traditions before language was invented to be written down? All the math and all of the aspects, all the ratios that spin mathematically from the two simple yes and no, on and off, white and black, top and bottom, right and left, male and female, all of it is represented in the quantum field, where we see protons and antiprotons and electromagnetism and sound. All of it bores down into basic, computer code, zeros and ones. Quantum computer code being 0 and 1 and what is halfway in between, the maybe aspect. This is where the Schrodinger's cat is both living and dead cat. This is living cat, this is dead cat, but everything floats here until consciousness arrives in the same, and then one of these two pops into existence. All of it's based on resonance fields. These are examples of sound waves and all their harmonics and overtones, and octaves and harmonic relationships mathematically that form pleasing vibrational frequency interactions. We call those chords, we call it music. It's basically an underlying principle of everything, where actually the biggest yin-yang that you can imagine is where the two aspects of the yin-yang are intimately entangled together. It doesn't matter where they are in the whole universe. They could be 100 million light years away and they're still influencing each other's responses outside of time, faster than the speed of light. Entangled particles, once they meet, are forever entangled. That's you and me, by the way. That's you and me when we align ourselves together and we enter in our consciousness. We are entangled, as I've said before. That means that the things that are changing in my life, lickety-split, my life is exploding. It means that yours is too. And if it's not right now, it's coming soon, as I've said also before. But we're now seeing this reflected in the quantum field in general in the world. People are now questioning in a way that they've never done before. Quantum physicists are spending more and more of their time trying to find out what's the nature of reality and consciousness. Infinite number of parallel ideas of what things could be. Mind linking together our consciousness as we explore bringing ourselves together in a collective unconscious mind that creates larger reality from an infinite number of standpoints at once. It's what the ancient texts talked about, by the infinite number of eyes and noses and mouths and bodies and standpoints of view of consciousness itself, where there's an infinite number of bodies, an infinite number of eyes, an infinite number of noses, infinite number of hands, an infinite number of viewpoints, and all of them are playing forth in an infinite number of corridors of every possibility of anything that could possibly be in the mind of the universal sort of Godhood. As I begin to hone my consciousness into higher and higher places, I draw the dominant high consciousness parts of my own collective unconscious mind to me, my personal circle of enlightened elders whose job it is to help me along my path. When we align ourselves together in a collective unconscious entrainment, our own giant mind that we're creating can pull our massive collective mind elders to bear, to help us in this endeavor. Sort of psychedelic brain experience, the kind of thing that you experience traditionally in every culture with the sacred medications, the ayahuascas and the magic mushrooms and the peyotes of the world. Those open up our minds to all this stuff I'm talking about, so we can see it's for real. Look at this. I go into the Upanishads to ask questions. Niels Bohr, Nobel Prize-winning physicist. Einstein. When I read the Bhagavad Gita and reflect about how God created this universe, everything else seems so superfluous. Schrödinger himself. The multiplicity is only apparent. This is the doctrine of the Upanishads, and not of the Upanishads only. The mystical experience of the union with God regularly leads to this view, unless strong prejudices stand in the way. Heisenberg. After the conversations about Indian philosophy, some of the ideas of quantum physics that had seemed so crazy suddenly made much more sense. So we're not the only ones seeing this connection. The grandest physicists in the world, in history, have delved in the same place. Science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature, and that is because, in the last analysis, we ourselves are a part of the mystery that we are trying to solve. Essentially, we're trying to find out the deepest part of where reality comes from, and it comes from us, the deepest part of us, before a thought, in the present moment, an infinite number of standpoints of all of us together in the grand, universal, collective unconscious mind, manufacturing reality moment by moment, infinite number of standpoints at once, synchronized up together. We've come unsynchronized and the world is falling apart. We need to resynchronize ourselves together. so that we can understand the grand yin-yang of all things, the secret of everything, secret of the universe, the still point in our own consciousness before a thought in the present moment, where we can transform ourselves. Consciousness is emerging from its chrysalis, right? And that's what the soundtrack today is all about. So headphones, please. Take a big breath and blow it out and let it go. And here we go. thank you all for being here with me. It's my honor and my privilege to be with you. And I'll be here next Sunday at the same time, 12:30. So thank you all. See you then. And see you next week.